You know that feeling, right? That cozy, almost smug sense of security when you're tucked away indoors. And outside, the world is just washing away. A locked door, the steady drumming of rain against the window pane, maybe a crackling fire or a good book in hand. It's a feeling of safety, a comforting illusion that nothing can touch you. But what if that feeling is a lie? What if, on nights like these, when the storm rages outside, the real terror isn't out there, battling the wind and the deluge? What if it's already inside? Tonight, we're going to share 3 chilling accounts where people learned the hard way that a rainy night can be more than just a little damp and dreary. For them, the storm didn't just bring water. It brought a kind of fear that seeps into your bones and stays there, long after the last drop has fallen. Story: The Eye in the Wall. Caleb Fletcher was just 16 the night his world tilted on its axis. His parents were 3 towns over, celebrating a cousin's wedding, leaving Caleb with the glorious, albeit slightly daunting, freedom of an empty house. The quiet was profound, broken only by the relentless drumming of rain on the roof, a rhythmic symphony that usually lulled him into a deep sense of peace. Caleb actually liked storms. They had a way of making the sprawling, sometimes overwhelming world outside feel smaller, more manageable, even safe. It was just him and the elements, cozy and contained. So, he went through the familiar motions. Locked the front door with a satisfying click, double-checked the back slider, even though he knew it was already secure. Then microwaved some leftover pizza, the ultimate comfort food for a solo night in. He flopped onto the couch, remote in one hand, phone in the other, scrolling through endless feeds while low, distant thunder rumbled like a sleepy giant. Nothing to worry about, he thought. Just another rainy night. The first scratch came around 10:30. It was quick, sharp, almost delicate, like a fingernail dragged across drywall. Caleb paused his show, muting the television, his head cocked. Was that just the house settling? Old houses make all sorts of creaks and groans, especially when the weather shifts. Then came another scratch, closer this time, and undeniably sharper. It seemed to echo from the hallway that led to his bedroom, a dark corridor that now felt suddenly longer, more ominous. He tried to rationalize it away, telling himself it was just the wind rattling loose siding, or maybe the ancient plumbing groaning. He took a deep breath, turned the volume back up, and tried to lose himself in the show again. But then it started. Scratch, scratch, scratch. Now it had a rhythm, deliberate and impatient, a sound that drilled directly into his skull. The casual comfort of his evening evaporated, replaced by a prickle of unease that crawled up his spine. His heart, previously content, began to beat a little quicker, a frantic drum against his ribs. He stood slowly, the pizza long forgotten, and walked toward the hallway. The overhead light flickered once, twice, casting dancing shadows, then steadied, mockingly bright. Outside, the rain lashed against the windows harder, a furious symphony that was almost loud enough to drown the noise. Almost. He called out, his voice thin, "Hello!" Half question, half warning, hoping to scare away whatever imaginary thing was making the sound. Or perhaps just to hear another human voice. No answer, only the scratching, faster now, more insistent, like something desperate, something wanting out. Caleb's mouth went dry, a sudden desert in his throat. Every childhood fear he'd ever outgrown came rushing back in a terrifying torrent. Monsters in the closet, things lurking under the bed, the suffocating feeling of being watched when the night light clicked off. He felt like that scared kid again, only now there was no parent to call out to. He crept toward his bedroom door, phone flashlight raised, its beam a weak, trembling beacon against the encroaching darkness. The hallway smelled faintly of wet plaster, a damp, earthy scent that seemed utterly out of place. When he finally reached the doorway, the scratching stopped. Abruptly, the silence that followed was thick and pulsing, a heavy blanket that pressed down on him. Then, a single cold drop of water hit his forehead. He flinched, glancing up, expecting to see a dark stain, a drip. But there was no leak, no wet spot on the ceiling. just the pristine, albeit slightly yellowed, plaster. Inside the bedroom, everything looked perfectly normal. The unmade bed, the cluttered desk piled high with schoolbooks and gaming paraphernalia, the faded posters of superheroes and fantasy landscapes on the wall. He stepped in, shutting the door behind him with a soft click, and pressed his back to it. And if the flimsy wood could offer any real protection, the house felt colder now, a chill that had nothing to do with the thermostat. His breath came out in faint white clouds, visible in the dim light, even though the thermostat clearly read 71 degrees. He shivered, a deep, bone-rattling tremor. Scratch. This time, it wasn't from the hallway. Came from inside the wall, right beside his headboard. He slowly turned, his eyes scanning the wall. There it was, a thin, vertical crack no wider than a credit card, running from the baseboard all the way up to picture rail height. It was impossible. He knew every inch of his room. This crack was new, undeniably new. Paint chips, tiny white flakes, littered the carpet below, stark against the dark pile. He leaned closer, his heart hammering a frantic rhythm against his ribs. From within the fissure came a moist, earthy smell, distinct and unsettling, like turned soil after a heavy rain. It was the smell of something alive, but not in a good way. He whispered, his voice barely audible, "It's just the storm." But the words felt hollow, utterly unconvincing even to himself. Another scratch, more insistent now, and a sliver of plaster fell away, exposing a deeper darkness. Through the widening crack, something moved, slow, wet, deliberate. It was a movement that defied explanation, a shifting shadow in the gloom. Caleb, driven by a morbid curiosity he couldn't control, crouched low, his right eye lining up perfectly with the fissure, peering into the abyss. And then, a dark brown iris stared back at him, unblinking. It was an eye, unmistakably an eye, glistening in the dim light, a perfect, terrifying sphere. The pupil, a black void, dilated slowly, drinking in the faint light that filtered through the crack. For a heartbeat, neither moved. Time seemed to stop, suspended in that horrific moment of mutual observation. Then the eye shifted, angling as if to get a better view, to take him in more fully. A low, ragged breath, moist and chilling, echoed from within the wall. It wasn't human. Couldn't be. Caleb screamed, a raw, primal sound that tore from his throat. He stumbled backward, tripping over his desk chair, the sudden movement sending him crashing to the floor with a sickening thud. The eye vanished, replaced by frantic, furious scratching that erupted from floor to ceiling, like dozens of claws racing inside the studs, desperate, enraged. He scrambled up, adrenaline coursing through his veins, yanked open the bedroom door, and bolted down the hallway, not even bothering to look back. He didn't stop to grab shoes or a jacket, the cold rain outside suddenly preferable to the horrors within. Barefoot, he sprinted across the rain-slick street, the pavement biting at his soles, toward the only neighbor he knew was definitely home. Officer Ramirez, a city cop who worked nights and always kept his patrol car parked conspicuously in the driveway. Caleb pounded on the door, sobbing, soaked to the skin in seconds, the rain mixing with his tears. Ramirez, a burly man with a kind but stern face, opened the door in sweatpants and a department t-shirt, his sidearm already unclipped from its holster. He took one look at the hysterical, drenched teenager on his porch and knew something was terribly wrong. Caleb managed one coherent sentence through his gasps. "There's someone inside my wall." They went back together, Ramirez's powerful flashlight cutting yellow tunnels through the relentless downpour, its beam dancing across the puddles. Inside Caleb's house, the living room lights still glowed, a beacon of false normalcy. The scratching had stopped. The eerie silence had returned, heavy and oppressive. When they entered Caleb's bedroom, the wall was flawless. Not a single crack, no paint chips, no mar in the drywall. Even the plaster dust on the carpet had vanished, as if swept away by an invisible hand. Ramirez, ever the professional, checked every possible hiding spot. Closets, under the bed, even the attic access panel. Nothing. He radioed for backup, his voice calm but his eyes sharp, scanning every corner. 2 more units arrived within minutes, their blue and red lights flashing through the rain. Officers swept the entire property, inside and out, a K-9 unit circling the perimeter twice, its handler shining a powerful light into every bush and shadow. No footprints appeared in the mud outside, no disturbance in the crawl space, no sign of forced entry anywhere. It was as if Caleb had imagined the entire terrifying ordeal. They stayed until dawn, the house now filled with the quiet, methodical movements of law enforcement. Caleb sat wrapped in a thick blanket on the couch, staring at the hallway, waiting, dreading, for the scratching to return. It never did. 2 days later, police arrested a vagrant 2 blocks over after a different family reported similar scratching sounds and a fleeting glimpse of a tall, gaunt man with a gray-streaked beard lurking near their home. In his backpack, officers found a folding drywall saw, a box of plaster patches, and, chillingly, a small makeup kit containing brown contact lenses. The pieces clicked into place. But the horror of the memory remained. Caleb's parents, shaken to their core, installed motion sensor lights that bathed the yard in a sudden, blinding glow at the slightest movement, an elaborate alarm system that chirped and whirred, and a bedroom camera that fed directly to their phones, giving them a constant, digital eye on their son's sanctuary. They also banned him from ever staying home alone during storms. He doesn't argue. He can't. On rainy nights, when the wind howls and the house groans, he still hears the scratching, sometimes faint, sometimes right behind the headboard, always followed by the vivid, terrifying memory of that single, watching eye. It's a phantom limb of fear, forever twitching in the dark. Rain hammers rooftops, a relentless percussion that washes out roads, floods low-lying areas, and drowns out ordinary sounds. It creates a world of its own, a muffled, isolated realm. But it also, in its own insidious way, washes away the line between what's outside and what's already gotten in. It blurs the edges of reality, inviting things to cross boundaries they never should. Story: the flood that took the children, the town of Stillwater Hollow. As its name suggests, sits nestled in a narrow valley, a picturesque but precarious spot where 3 creeks converge. It's a place of quiet beauty, but also of recurring dread. Every decade or so, heavy spring rains swell those creeks, pushing the water over their banks with a vengeance, turning quaint streets into murky canals and the first floors of homes into impromptu aquariums. The residents, a resilient and somewhat fatalistic lot, keep sandbags stacked like miniature sandcastles between their porches, a testament to their long-standing battle with the elements. They tell newcomers that the floods are just part of life here, a cyclical inconvenience they've learned to live with, until the year the rain simply refused to stop. It began on a Monday in late April. Not just a drizzle, but a relentless, heavy downpour. But if the sky itself had sprung a permanent leak. A low-pressure system, stubborn and unmoving, stalled directly overhead, feeding endless moisture into the valley. By Wednesday, the initial novelty of a snow day for the kids had worn off. Schools closed, their playgrounds quickly becoming shallow lakes. By Friday, power crews worked around the clock, battling outages and trying to keep the town from plunging into darkness. But their efforts were increasingly futile. And by Saturday, a new, far more terrifying phenomenon began to grip Stillwater Hollow. Children started disappearing. First was 8-year-old Ellie Harper. She lived on Sycamore Street, one of the lowest rows of houses, already partially submerged. Her mother, a creature of habit and comfort, tucked her in at 9, leaving the window cracked just a sliver so Ellie could hear the rain. She claimed it helped her sleep, a soothing white noise. At 2 a.m., the woman woke to an unsettling silence. The rain had paused, a sudden, eerie hush. A cold dread seeped into her bones. She checked Ellie's room and found the bed empty, the window wide open, its screen sliced neatly from corner to corner, as if by a razor. Search parties, grim-faced and increasingly desperate, trudged through ankle-deep water the next morning, their boots squelching in the mud. They found Ellie's bright yellow rubber duck, a cheerful anomaly, floating near a storm drain. But nothing else. Police initially suspected abduction, but the strange details mounted. No adult footprints appeared in the thick, clinging mud outside the house. Only tiny indents, almost like child-sized bare feet, leading away from the house, directly toward the rapidly rising creek. 2 nights later, the Delgado twins, 6-year-old Marco and Maria, vanished from an upstairs bedroom. Their window, bafflingly, was locked from the inside, but the glass pane itself had been meticulously removed and set against the hallway wall, without a single crack. Again, no adult prints outside, just the same small, barefoot impressions, heading into the swirling water. Panic began to spread like the floodwaters themselves, seeping into every corner of the community. Parents pulled their kids into master bedrooms, pushed heavy dressers against doors, and took turns staying awake, their eyes wide with fear, listening to every creak, every drip. Still, with a horrifying, sickening regularity, every time the rain paused, another child disappeared. By the end of the week, 9 children were gone. The town council, overwhelmed and terrified, declared a dusk-to-dawn curfew. National Guard trucks, heavy and imposing, rolled into the valley, their presence a stark reminder of the escalating crisis. Reporters, sensing a national tragedy, set up satellite dishes on the courthouse steps, their cameras pointed at the rising water and the faces of grieving parents. Speculation spread faster than the floodwater, morphing into whispers and then desperate theories. Some claimed a cult, preying on the valley's most innocent. Others whispered about an old legend, a chilling local myth passed down through generations. The Hollow Man, a shambling, ancient thing that supposedly lived beneath the silt bed of the converging creeks, feeding on innocence to maintain its unnatural immortality. Whatever the truth, every single parent in Stillwater Hollow agreed on one terrifying fact. The children weren't just wandering off. They were being lured out, drawn by something they heard in the brief, unsettling lull between rain bursts. A voice, a haunting, sweet song, sometimes even their own names spoken in tones only they recognized. It was a siren call only children could hear. I was there that week, a junior reporter, young and naive, stringing for a city paper, hoping to make a name for myself. I stayed at the Riverside Inn, a squat, unglamorous motel built on the only slight rise in town, the only place that still had generator power and, crucially, coffee. On the final night of my stay, the rain stopped. Not for long, just for 13 agonizing minutes. I stood outside, drawn by an inexplicable pull, watching the water slowly crawl up the parking lot asphalt, reaching for my boots. Streetlights flickered erratically, casting long, dancing shadows. The air, heavy with moisture, smelled of moss and copper, a metallic tang that felt almost electric. Across the road, through the gloom and the shimmering reflections, I saw her. A girl, maybe 6 years old, stepping onto her family's porch, her small figure silhouetted against the dim light within. She wore frozen pajamas, her hair tousled, her eyes half open, glazed and distant, like she was sleepwalking. My heart leaped into my throat. I called out a desperate shout, but she didn't flinch, didn't react. She moved with an unsettling grace, descending the porch steps, her tiny feet stepping directly into the swirling, dark water. I ran, boots splashing, yelling for help, for anyone to see what I was seeing. Halfway to her, my breath catching in my chest, I heard it. A low humming, almost a lullaby, rising from the floodwater itself. It was melodic, mournful, and utterly captivating. The girl, still unfazed by my shouts, turned slowly. She smiled, a vacant, unsettlingly serene expression, and said, her voice thin and reedy, "He's lonely." Then, something broke the surface behind her. A pale hand, fingers too long, impossibly slender, knuckles bulbous and distended, glistening wetly in the dim light. It cupped her shoulder gently, almost lovingly. And then, she slipped beneath the water without a splash, without a ripple, as if she were simply dissolving. I dove, a desperate, foolish instinct, reaching for her, my own lungs burning. I came up sputtering, gasping, with only her tiny, sodden slipper clutched in my hand. Immediately, floodlights from the National Guard vehicles hit the spot where she'd vanished, illuminating the disturbed water. Guardsmen fired flares into the sky, their brilliant light turning the creek a sickly greenish white. But there was nothing there. Nothing but ripples and mud, the kind that pulls boots off your feet and swallows them whole, erasing any trace. At dawn, as if on cue, the rain resumed, heavier than ever, a furious, cleansing deluge. By midday, the old levee, weakened by days of relentless pressure, finally cracked, and the entire valley became a single, vast, terrifying lake. Helicopters circled for days, their rotors beating a mournful rhythm, searching. But no more children were taken. When the water finally receded weeks later, leaving behind a thick layer of silty mud, the footprints were gone, erased by the earth itself. Of the 9 kids, only one was ever found, Ellie Harper. She turned up on the same storm drain grate 3 weeks later, miraculously dehydrated but alive. She hasn't spoken a single word since. Doctors say trauma can mute a child, can steal their voice. But her parents, their eyes haunted, believe she simply has nothing left to say to the living. She saw things, heard things that can't be put into words. Stillwater Hollow eventually rebuilt, the houses now on stilts, defiant against the next flood. People marry, work, raise new families. Life, in its stubborn way, goes on. Yet, during every hard rain, porch lights burn all night, a silent vigil. And parents count heads at the first hush between thunderclaps. Because when the rain stops, something still walks the valley, humming a lullaby only children can hear, collecting what it lost, waiting for the next pause in the storm. Storms wash away footprints, yes. They scour the earth clean, but they can't wash away memories. In fact, sometimes the water doesn't just clean. It brings things back. Things that remember us better than we remember them. Things that remind us of what we'd rather forget. And sometimes those things are closer than you could ever imagine. Story: the ceiling leak. Richard Thompson was a creature of habit, a man who preferred his routines undisturbed. He owned a modest duplex on Marigold Avenue, a quiet, tree-lined block where neighbors would offer a polite wave but rarely stop to chat. He lived in one unit, a meticulously kept space, and rented the other to Marcus, a quiet software engineer who also seemed to value his solitude. Both men kept odd hours, often passing each other in the driveway with a brief nod, a silent acknowledgement of their shared existence, but otherwise kept to themselves. It was a perfectly amicable, if somewhat detached, arrangement. One blustery March evening, a nor'easter, a monstrous storm system, parked itself directly over the coast. Rain fell in sheets, a relentless, deafening deluge that lasted for 36 hours straight. Marcus, like many in his profession, worked from home, earbuds firmly in place, code scrolling endlessly across his dual monitors. The rhythmic drumming of the rain was almost hypnotic, a background hum to his focused work. Around midnight, however, a new sound cut through the storm's roar. A faint, persistent drip, drip, drip. He looked up, tracing the sound, and saw it. A dark, spreading circle blooming on the ceiling directly above his coffee maker. He sighed, a minor annoyance in an otherwise productive night. He set out a pot to catch the drips, sent a quick email to Richard about the leak, finished his coding sprint, and, assuming it was a simple plumbing issue, went to bed. By morning, the drip had escalated, becoming a steady trickle. The dark circle on the ceiling had grown considerably, and the paint itself had begun to balloon, distended with trapped water, threatening to burst. Marcus texted Richard again, a little more urgently this time. No answer. He tried calling, straight to voicemail, He figured his landlord was probably out dealing with storm damage elsewhere, maybe a burst pipe at another property. He moved his precious electronics to the dry side of the room, set out another bucket, and tried to concentrate on his work, the growing water stain a constant, unsettling distraction. That night, the rain intensified further, as if making up for lost time. Wind howled like a banshee, rattling the windows in their frames. The power flickered ominously, dipping and surging, threatening to cut out completely. Around 2 a.m., as Marcus was trying to ignore the increasingly desperate gurgling sounds from above, the ceiling finally gave way. It wasn't a polite splash, not a gentle collapse. It was a wet, explosive roar. Gallons of black, putrid water, thick with insulation and debris, crashed down with shocking force, carrying plaster, sodden drywall, and something heavier, something disturbingly solid. Marcus scrambled away, slipping wildly on the now-soaked tile floor, his heart leaping into his throat. He landed hard, his breath knocked out of him, soaked and shivering. When the dust and spray finally settled, he saw it. Or rather, he saw them. A human foot, gray and horrifyingly waterlogged, poked grotesquely from the debris, ankle-deep in the wreckage. The rest of the body lay encased in saturated ceiling chunks, face up, arms bent at unnatural angles, as if clawing for air in its final, desperate moments. It was a scene of utter, stomach-churning horror. He dialed 911, his hands shaking so violently he almost dropped his phone. His voice, when it came, was a reedy, terrified whisper, barely coherent. Officers arrived within minutes, their blue and red lights painting the water-streaked walls in a macabre dance, followed quickly by paramedics and a fire crew, their faces grim. They carefully extracted the corpse, laying it gently but firmly on a tarp in the kitchen, a stark, lifeless form amidst the chaos. The face was bloated beyond recognition, a horrifying mask of water damage and decay. But the wallet, retrieved from the back pocket, was miraculously intact. A driver's license identifying Richard Thompson, issue date 14 months prior. Marcus stared, numb with shock. His landlord, the man he'd seen just last week. Detectives immediately sealed the duplex as a crime scene. Marcus, given a cursory interview, spent the night at a sterile, anonymous motel, lying awake in the dark, staring at the ceiling, waiting for it to burst open and reveal another nightmare. He couldn't shake the image of that waterlogged face, that impossible ID. The autopsy results came back quickly, bringing a new layer of chilling mystery. Richard had died of a heart attack. No foul play, no struggle, just a sudden, silent end. The medical examiner estimated the time of death, 12 to 14 months earlier. Marcus felt a cold dread spread through him. 12 to 14 months? Yet he had seen Richard, waved to him, even exchanged brief pleasantries. Every single week since moving in, he'd paid his rent dutifully, slipping checks beneath Richard's door, and had always received emailed receipts the very next day, punctual as clockwork. Who, then, had he been interacting with all this time? Police traced the IP address on those emailed receipts. It led them to a server farm overseas, a digital ghost in the machine, utterly untraceable. They checked traffic cam footage near the property, hoping for a clearer picture. Richard's car, a nondescript sedan, appeared in the driveway at random hours, just as Marcus remembered. But the driver always wore a hoodie, its shadow obscuring their face, making identification impossible. The last timestamp on the footage was the night before the storm, the very same night Marcus had emailed about the initial leak. The timing was too perfect, too suspicious. Investigators, now thoroughly convinced something far more sinister was at play, tore apart both units. In Richard's side, they found a freezer, oddly stuffed not with food, but with dry ice carefully preserving something. Beside it, a box of latex gloves, and a printer loaded with blank lease receipts. In Marcus's attic, hidden away, wedged between insulation bats, officers uncovered a second phone, rigged as a hotspot, a voice modulator, and a chilling folder of photos, hundreds of shots of Marcus, taken through windows in the grocery store, even one of him sleeping in his own bed. The implication was terrifying, sickeningly clear. Someone had been living above Marcus for months, maybe longer. Someone who wanted to be Richard, meticulously collecting rent, maintaining the illusion, wearing his clothes, driving his car. Someone who had been watching Marcus, studying his habits, a silent predator in the shadows. This imposter had known the ceiling would eventually rot through, the leak growing worse with every storm, and had likely planned to vanish into the night before discovery, leaving behind a perfectly staged disappearance. But the storm, that relentless nor'easter, had arrived early. The waterlogged plaster, heavy with the weight of the imposter's terrible secret, simply couldn't hold. The body, Richard Thompson's real body, dropped like a rotten fruit, revealing the awful truth. Police never identified the imposter. Footprints found in the attic, though distinct, matched no database. The hoodie-clad driver vanished into the pounding rain that night, leaving behind only soggy, meaningless receipts and a lingering, acrid smell of wet drywall, a scent that Marcus would forever associate with betrayal and terror. Marcus moved across the country, as far away from Marigold Avenue as he could get. He codes from a new apartment now, top floor, no attic above, just roof and sky, a vast, comforting expanse. Still, every single time it rains, he checks the ceiling for the slightest discoloration, listens with bated breath for that soft, insidious drip that says something hidden, something terrible, is ready to fall. Because some secrets, once they've been brought to light by the storm, can never truly be forgotten. 3 storms, 3 terrifying nights, 3 doors you thought were locked, securely separating you from the darkness outside. But as these stories show, sometimes the greatest threats aren't out there. They're already inside, waiting for the rain to mask their presence, to amplify their terror. Next time the sky opens up, and the power flickers, plunging your home into a temporary, uneasy gloom, remember this. Safety isn't a given. It's a story we tell ourselves to stay calm, a fragile shield against a world that can, at any moment, turn truly horrifying. If you've lived through a night that proved otherwise, if you've got a true story that blurs the line between a simple storm and an absolute nightmare, we want to hear it. Write it down, every chilling detail, and send it to us. We read every letter, every whispered account. And your true story might just be the one that keeps the rest of us awake, staring into the dark, wondering what's lurking beyond the sound of the rain. For more tales that blur the line between the comforting patter of rain and the cold grip of a nightmare, hit subscribe and ring that bell, because the next storm is already on the radar, gathering its strength. And you may not be as alone as you think.